The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the forgotten town of Sable Ridge when the stranger appeared like a desert mirage. Captain Daniel Shaw, his sun-bleached fatigues hanging loosely on his gaunt frame, sat motionless on the rusted bus bench, his hollow eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the horizon. The locals whispered nervously as they passed, combat boots caked with Middle Eastern dust, hands that trembled slightly despite their obvious strength, the faint scar peeking above his collar that told of horrors witnessed. Old Sarah Connolly watched from her hardware store window, her breath fogging the glass as memories of her own Marine husband came flooding back. This wasn't just another drifter. This was a man who'd walked through hell and somehow lived to tell about it.
Deputy Kyle Mercer adjusted his belt nervously as he approached the silent soldier. "You gonna tell me what brings you to Sable Ridge, friend?" The only response was the faint jingle of dog tags beneath the man's shirt. When backup arrived, Sheriff Hollis made the call, "Bring in the K-9 unit." Officer Tanya Gleason stepped out of the cruiser with Rex, her prized German Shepherd who'd taken down armed suspects without hesitation. But the moment Rex caught the soldier's scent, the trained attack dog froze. His ears flattened, his tail dropped, and then he did something no one could have predicted. The hardened officers exchanged stunned glances as Rex, the fearless police dog, began to whimper like a lost puppy.
A hush fell over the gathered crowd as Rex broke every protocol Officer Gleason had ever taught him. The massive German Shepherd approached the soldier with slow, trembling steps, not the confident stride of a police canine, but the hesitant gait of recognition. When Rex pressed his wet nose against the soldier's chest and let out a heart-wrenching whine, even the sheriff removed his hat in respect. Captain Shaw's calloused hands, which had remained steady through countless firefights, now shook violently as they buried themselves in Rex's thick fur. "Easy now, boy, easy," Shaw murmured, his voice cracking with emotion. Tears carved clean streaks through the desert dust on his face as he whispered words only the dog could hear. The townspeople would later swear they saw the soldier's entire body shudder as if releasing 5 years of pent-up grief.
The soldier finally spoke, his voice rough with disuse. "Captain Daniel Shaw, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines." The military ID he produced was worn nearly translucent from constant handling. Sheriff Hollis's eyes widened. This wasn't just any veteran. This was a decorated officer declared missing in action after a brutal firefight in Afghanistan's Kunar province 5 years earlier. Rex. No, the dog's reaction suggested this was something far more profound, kept nudging Shaw's hands insistently, his entire body vibrating with excitement. When Shaw turned the dog's collar, his breath caught. Beneath the official canine tags hung a rusted metal bone with one word engraved in crude letters, Valor. The name echoed through Shaw's mind like artillery fire. "But you died," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You died, saving us all."
The desert wind carried Shaw's anguished whisper away as Valor, for that was his true name, licked his former handler's scarred fingers with desperate urgency. 5 years evaporated in that moment. The explosion that should have killed them both, the desperate search through rubble, the empty collar Shaw had carried in his pocket every day since. Now here they stood, 2 ghosts from the same forgotten battle, reunited against all odds. Officer Gleason's professional composure cracked
as she scanned Valor's microchip. This can't be right," she stammered, her face pale. "This chip traces to military working dog Valor, declared killed in action, protecting his unit in 2018. Yet the warm, panting dog leaning against Shaw's legs was undeniably alive. The crowd collectively held its breath as Shaw ran trembling fingers over familiar scars, the notch in Valor's left ear from shrapnel, the burn mark on his shoulder from when he dragged Shaw from a burning Humvee.
Science had no explanation for what happened that day in Sable Ridge. How a military working dog declared dead 5 years earlier could appear hundreds of miles from where he fell. How he'd instantly recognized a handler he hadn't seen since that fateful day in Kunar province. Shaw knelt in the dust, his forehead pressed against Valor's as the dog whined softly. "Dogs don't forget," Shaw told the stunned onlookers, his voice thick with emotion. "Not their names, not their brothers." The sheriff exchanged glances with his deputies, suddenly understanding they weren't witnessing a simple stray dog case, but something far more profound, a bond that had somehow survived war, time, and even death itself. Old Sarah Connolly wiped her eyes with her apron, remembering how her husband's service dog had waited at the window for months after his funeral. Some loves, it seemed, refused to die.
Shaw's battle-roughened fingers found the jagged scar behind Valor's ear without hesitation. "Taliban ambush near Sangin," he explained to the gathered crowd, his voice distant with memory. "Took 3 rounds dragging me to cover." As if in confirmation, Valor licked the puckered scar across Shaw's ribs, mirror injuries from the same deadly encounter. The sheriff's tough exterior cracked as he watched the reunion. "I've seen a lot in my 30 years, he admitted quietly, "but nothing like this." Young Finn Bradford pushed through the crowd, his eyes wide. "My grandpa told stories about war dogs," he exclaimed, "said they'd walk through fire for their soldiers." Shaw nodded slowly, his hand never leaving Valor's head. "This one did. Walked through fire and somehow found his way back."
The official records left no room for doubt. Military working dog Valor had died heroically, saving 6 Marines during an IED attack. His body never recovered. Shaw had mourned at an empty grave, leaving behind his own dog tags as tribute. Yet here Valor stood, older but unmistakable, his intelligent eyes locked on Shaw's face. "Who brought you home, boy?" Shaw murmured, scratching behind those familiar ears. The answer came in the form of a black government SUV rolling to a stop nearby. Lieutenant Commander Cross from Joint Special Ops stepped out, his grim expression confirming what Shaw already suspected. Someone had covered up Valor's survival, and they weren't pleased this secret had clawed its way back to life in the middle of an Arizona dust bowl. The tension thickened as Cross approached, his eyes flickering between Shaw and the dog. "Captain," he said stiffly, "we need to talk."
The weight of 5 lost years came crashing down as Shaw sank to his knees in the desert dust, clutching Valor like a drowning man to a lifeline. "I searched every damn POW camp, every village." His voice broke as Valor licked the tears from his weather-beaten face. The dog's tail wagged slowly, steadily. No anger, no blame, just pure devotion that had somehow survived half a decade of separation. Even hardened deputies wiped their eyes at the sight. Officer Gleason knelt beside them, her professional detachment crumbling. "He's been with our unit 3 years," she confessed. "Never reacted to anyone like this." Shaw buried his face in Valor's fur, breathing in the familiar scent that had haunted his dreams. In that moment, none of the questions mattered. How Valor survived, where he'd been, why he was here. All that mattered was this impossible reunion, this second chance neither soldier nor dog had dared hope for.
American style and narrative tone.
As Shaw adjusted Valor's well-worn collar, a small metal plate fell into the dust. Not standard military issue. This was handmade, the edges worn smooth from years of handling. Sheriff Hollis picked it up, his calloused fingers tracing the etched words. If found, return to Captain D. Shaw. Reward, $1 and one good boy's eternal gratitude. The tough old lawman's hands shook as he read the inscription aloud. This wasn't government property. This was one soldier's desperate prayer that somehow, against all odds, his best friend might find his way home. Shaw took the tag with trembling fingers, his breath catching as he turned it over to reveal Valor's original service number scratched into the metal. 5 years. 5 long years of carrying the weight of that loss. And now, here they both were, whole, alive, together. The crowd erupted in applause, but Shaw heard none of it. His world had narrowed to the warm, panting dog pressing against his side, and the unshakable certainty that some bonds truly are unbreakable.
The desert night had been still, too still. Shaw remembered the weight of his rifle, the heat of the sand beneath his knees. Valor had been tense, ears twitching before the first shot even rang out. Then, chaos, gunfire, shouting, the explosion that lit up the sky like hell itself cracking open. Shaw's last memory before the darkness, Valor's body slamming into him, knocking him clear of the blast radius. The dog's frantic barks fading as the world went black. He'd woken up in a field hospital, burns on his arms, his throat raw from screaming Valor's name. They told him no one survived that blast. They were wrong.
The surviving Marines never forgot what they saw that night. Valor, bleeding from 3 separate gunshot wounds, dragging Shaw's unconscious body toward cover as the firefight raged. When the second explosion hit, the dog had done something no training could explain. He'd turned back, charged straight into the collapsing building where 2 wounded soldiers were trapped. The team swore they heard one final, defiant bark before the roof caved in. The military declared Valor's actions above and beyond. They gave him a posthumous medal, closed the case. But in the darkness of the Afghan night, someone had seen that dying German shepherd crawl from the rubble and made a choice. Shaw reached into his pocket now, pulling out the single dog tag he'd kept on him every day since the attack. The metal was worn smooth from constant handling, the blood long since faded to a rust-colored stain. "I promised I'd bring you home," he whispered, pressing it against Valor's nose. The dog sniffed it, then let out a soft whine of recognition. Officer Gleason gasped. That's not possible. Dogs don't remember scents after that long." Shaw just smiled through tears. "This one does." The crowd fell silent as Valor gently took the tag in his teeth, holding it like the precious relic it was.
The memorial service had been a blur. The folded flag, the rifle salute, the empty casket lowered into Arlington's hallowed ground. Shaw had stood at attention, his face a mask of stone, while inside he screamed. Now, 5 years later, the truth was panting at his feet. Lieutenant Commander Cross shifted uncomfortably. "Captain, there are things you don't understand." Shaw's hands tightened in Valor's fur. "Try me." The desert wind carried the first real secret. The casket had never been empty. Someone had placed Valor's shredded vest inside. A vest that, forensics later proved, hadn't contained nearly enough blood for a fatal wound.
Shaw's nightmares always ended the same way. Valor's fading barks, the taste of dust and blood, his own useless hands clawing at rubble. He'd woken every night for a year screaming the dog's name.
The VA therapist called it survivor's guilt. Shaw called it failure. Now, as Valor leaned against him, warm and solid and alive, the soldier finally understood why those dreams had never stopped. Some part of him had always known his dog was out there, waiting. "I should have kept looking," he choked out. Valor licked his cheek, as if to say, "You found me now."
It started with old Sarah Connolly, her gnarled hands pressed to her mouth. Then Deputy Mercer, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. Even hardened Sheriff Hollis turned away, his shoulders shaking. Because this wasn't just a man and his dog. This was a love story 5 years in the making. Valor leaned his full weight against Shaw, his entire body vibrating with quiet joy. The soldier buried his face in the dog's neck, breathing in the familiar musk of leather and gunpowder that no amount of baths could erase. In that moment, the entire town of Sable Ridge bore witness to something rare and sacred, a bond that had defied war, bureaucracy, and even death itself.
Shaw's hands moved automatically, forming the silent command they'd used in 100 combat situations. Valor's ears perked up. Then, with a precision that made Officer Gleason gasp, the dog dropped onto his belly and crawled forward exactly 6 paces, just like they'd practiced in the dusty training yards of Kandahar. Shaw's laugh was half sob. "Still got it, huh?" Valor's tail thumped once. Of course he did. Muscle memory, battle-tested instinct, or maybe just love, stubborn and unbreakable. The sheriff exhaled sharply. "I'll be damned. That's not a trained response. That's my dog," Shaw finished softly.
The clinic was silent except for the beep of the scanner. The vet, a no-nonsense woman who'd seen it all, went pale as the data loaded. "This chip was deactivated in 2018, she whispered. "Military records list this animal as deceased." The screen displayed something even more shocking, a second, older chip layered beneath the first. The vet's hands trembled as she read the code. "This one traces to a Black Ops veterinary unit in Germany." Shaw's blood ran cold. Someone had deliberately erased Valor's identity. Someone with the power to make a war dog disappear.
Lieutenant Commander Cross finally broke his silence. "Captain Shaw, you need to understand, Valor wasn't just any MWD. After Sanjin, his DNA showed anomalies." He hesitated. The explosion should have killed him. The fact he survived made him valuable. Shaw's grip on Valor tightened. "You're saying they took him, turned him into some lab experiment?" The crowd murmured angrily. Cross looked at the ground. "I'm saying, sometimes the military makes tough calls." Valor whined, pressing closer to Shaw. The soldier's voice dropped to a dangerous growl. "Only one call matters now. He's coming home with me." The Black Hawk's rotors kicked up dust as it landed on the outskirts of town. Cross stepped back, knowing he'd lost this battle. Shaw knelt in the dirt, forehead pressed to Valor's. "Hey, boy," he whispered, the same 2 words he'd said every morning in the desert. Valor's entire body shook with joy. His tail wagged so hard it created small dust clouds. Because after 5 long years, 2 wars, and countless nights wondering if he'd ever see his human again, those 2 simple words meant everything. Good dog.
The radio crackled as Sheriff Hollis called for additional units, his hand hovering near his sidearm. But before the words left his mouth, Rex's lips curled back in a snarl that froze the entire crowd. Not the trained aggression of a police canine. This was something primal. The sheriff slowly lowered his hand. "Easy now," he murmured. Shaw placed a calming hand on Valor's head. "He won't bite unless I'm threatened." The unspoken message hung heavy in the desert air. "And right now, You're all looking like threats. The backup cars rolled to a stop 50 yards back. No deputy dared approach closer.
Lieutenant Commander Cross's phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at the screen, then quickly silenced it. Too quickly. Shaw didn't miss the way the man's jaw tightened. Problem, Lieutenant? Cross forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just protocol, Captain. Standard procedure for reactivated assets. The euphemism made Shaw's blood boil. Valor wasn't some piece of equipment to be reactivated. He was a living, breathing soul who'd been stolen. The pieces were coming together now. The second microchip, the classified files, the way Cross kept checking his watch like they were on a timer. Someone powerful had invested a lot in keeping Valor's survival secret, and they weren't about to let some stubborn Marine ruin 5 years of careful planning.
The vehicle rolled in like a hearse at a funeral, its tinted windows swallowing the desert sun. 2 men in nondescript suits stepped out, their posture screaming government despite the civilian clothes. Shaw instinctively positioned himself between Valor and the newcomers. One agent flashed a badge too quickly to read. "Captain Shaw, we need to debrief you about sensitive materials." The crowd murmured. Old Sarah Connolly stepped forward, her voice shaking but firm. "Ain't no debriefing need 5 years after the fact." The agents ignored her, their focus laser-locked on Valor. The dog's hackles rose. He remembered these men, and he didn't like them one bit.
The taller agent reached into his jacket for a badge, he claimed, but Valor reacted like he'd drawn a weapon. A deep, guttural growl rolled from the German shepherd's chest, the kind that starts in the toes and rattles the bones. Shaw had only heard that sound once before, in a Kabul alley when a supposed ally pulled a knife. The agent froze. "Control your dog, Captain." Shaw's smile was all teeth. "He's not mine to control. Seems he remembers you, though." The standoff stretched taut as piano wire. Then Valor did something extraordinary. He stepped forward, placing his body squarely between Shaw and the agents, his message clear. "You want him? You go through me first."
Shaw's voice carried across the suddenly silent street. Not a shout, not a threat, a simple statement of fact. The agents exchanged glances. The crowd pressed closer, cell phones recording. Sheriff Hollis cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, this is my jurisdiction. Unless you have arrest warrants, I suggest you back off." The lead agent's smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "No warrants needed from military property, Sheriff." Shaw's hands curled into fists. Valor was many things: hero, survivor, friend, but he was never property. As the agents advanced, Shaw reached into his pocket and pulled out the one thing that could stop this madness. A faded photo of a young Marine and his dog, the words, "Never leave a man behind," scrawled across the bottom, in blood.
The agents hesitated just long enough. Shaw whistled, 2 short bursts, and Valor was moving before the sound faded. Together they bolted for the mesa beyond town, dust kicking up behind them. The desert welcomed them like old friends, the same way it had in 100 training exercises. Valor took point, his nose testing the wind, his body remembering every contour of the land. Shaw followed without question, trusting his partner's instincts like he had in a dozen war zones. Behind them, shouts and car doors slammed. But out here, in the vast openness where the military had first trained them to be unstoppable, they had the advantage. The agents would learn what the Taliban had. You don't hunt a Marine and his dog. They hunt you.
The Black Hawk's rotors kicked up a sandstorm as it descended toward their makeshift LZ. Lieutenant Commander Cross extended a hand. "Last chance, Captain. Get in now or face court-martial." Shaw turned to Valor.
and froze. The dog was backing away, ears flat, tail tucked. Not fear, refusal. Shaw understood instantly. After 5 years of cages and tests and strangers' hands, Valor would sooner die than enter another metal prison. The soldier made his choice without hesitation. He stepped back from the chopper. Cross's face darkened. "You're throwing away your career." Shaw just smiled and clicked his tongue twice. Valor bounded to his side. Some things, it seemed, were more important than orders.
The first shot kicked up dirt 10 feet to their left, warning fire. The second whizzed overhead, not warnings anymore. Valor loomed like lightning, knocking Shaw behind a boulder as the third shot rang out. The dog's training took over. Zigzag sprints to draw fire, strategic barks to disorient. Just like Sanguin, just like always. Shaw's military mind analyzed their options, even as his heart shattered. They were being shot at by their own people, by the very government they'd sworn to serve. Valor's eyes met his in the chaos, and the message was clear. I chose you then, I choose you now. The desert would decide their fate.
The ricochet caught Shaw in the thigh, a burning line of fire that sent him crashing to his knees. Valor was there instantly, applying pressure with his body the way he'd been trained. The dog's warm tongue cleaned the wound as Shaw fumbled for his belt to make a tourniquet. Somewhere beyond the pain, Shaw registered the approaching footsteps. He gripped Valor's collar. "Go, boy. Get out of here." The German shepherd didn't budge. Instead, he positioned himself over Shaw, a living shield between his soldier and the approaching danger. His lips curled back in the most terrifying snarl the agents had ever seen. The message was unmistakable. The next bullet would have to go through him first.
The desert wind saved them. A sudden sandstorm rolled in like divine intervention, reducing visibility to zero. The agents cursed, stumbling blindly. When the dust settled minutes later, they found only 3 things: Shaw's blood on the rocks, a single set of boot prints leading into the wilderness, and beside them, impossible to miss, the unmistakable tracks of a large German shepherd. The lead agent radioed in the failure, his voice tight with something almost like respect. Back in town, young Finn Bradford pocketed the dog tag he'd found near the bus stop. The inscription was barely legible, but he could make out the words, "Valor. If lost, return to Captain Shaw, no matter how long it takes." The boy smiled. Some stories, it seemed, weren't over yet.
The sandstorm swallowed them whole. By the time the government agents regrouped, Shaw and Valor had vanished like ghosts into the desert. In the days that followed, Sable Ridge buzzed with theories. Some claimed to have seen shadows moving through the arroyos at dusk. Others swore they heard a dog's distant bark carried on the wind. But the only real evidence they left behind sat undisturbed on that rusted bus bench. Shaw's faded military cap carefully placed beside Valor's police canine vest. A silent message to those who understood. We were here. We remember. And we're not done yet.
10-year-old Finn Bradford came every morning before school. His small hands arranged desert wildflowers in a cracked coffee can beside the bench, just like he'd seen at his grandfather's war memorial. For valor, he'd whisper, because no hero should be forgotten twice. The other kids laughed, but Finn didn't care. He'd seen the way that battle-scarred dog looked at his soldier, like Shaw hung the moon, like 5 years apart meant nothing. The flowers always disappeared by noon, though no one ever saw who took them. Old Sarah Connolly suspected the wind. Deputy Mercer wasn't so sure.
The Pentagon's press release called it a training exercise misunderstanding. The viral cell phone footage told a different story. A decorated Marine and his war dog fleeing gunfire from their own government. By week's end, #BringThemHome trended nationwide. Veterans flooded social media with photos of their own canine partners. Congress demanded hearings. But in a secure Virginia lab, a team of scientists watched different footage entirely. Security tapes from the night Valor disappeared from their facility 3 months prior. The timestamp matched exactly with Shaw's unexpected medical discharge. Their worst fear had come true. The test subject had remembered, and he'd gone to find his handler.
American Legion halls across the country buzzed with outrage. Men who'd served in Vietnam, Korea, Iraq, they recognized the unspoken truth the news anchors missed. This wasn't just about a dog. This was about the sacred promise etched into every soldier's soul: leave no one behind. Retired Colonel James Hathaway, 82, summed it up best on national television. "I don't care what paperwork says. When a dog saves 6 Marines and lives through hell to find his boy 20 years later, that's no military asset. That's family." His voice broke. "Bring our boys home."
No one remembered who started it. Maybe Sarah from the hardware store. Maybe Finn and his classmates. But by month's end, the rusted bus bench had transformed. Carved into the peeling green paint were 2 names, Capt. Shaw and Valor, with a crude but heartfelt bone between them. The sheriff made half-hearted noises about vandalism, but even his deputies added their own tribute. A small Marine Corps insignia sticker placed discreetly beneath the seat. Government agents came one night to remove it. By dawn, the names reappeared, deeper this time. Some messages can't be erased.
The photo surfaced on a veterans forum first, blurry, taken at dusk. A tall man in a cowboy hat, standing before the Afghanistan War Memorial, his face shadowed. Beside him, a large German shepherd with one ear slightly notched. The post went viral within hours. Military police swarmed the location, but found only 2 fresh items at the memorial's base: a set of dog tags, Shaw's, scratched but polished, and a well-chewed tennis ball. The memorial's caretaker, a retired sergeant major, refused to hand them over. "Some things," he told the furious agents, "belong to history now."
The Arlington caretakers noticed it first. Captain Daniel Shaw's empty grave, maintained in absentia, never collected leaves like the others. Fresh flowers appeared monthly, always red, white, and blue arrangements. Security cameras showed nothing but occasional shadows moving too fast to focus. Then, one rainy November morning, a groundskeeper found something that made him cross himself: perfect paw prints in the fresh mud leading up to the headstone, alongside boot prints with a distinctive limp. When he reported it, his supervisor just smiled. "Let it be, son. Some ghosts deserve their peace."
Sable Ridge old-timers swore they heard it sometimes. A deep, resonant howl that rolled across the desert at first light. Not the yipping of coyotes, but the full-throated cry of a large dog calling his pack. Deputy Mercer, now Sheriff Mercer, claimed it was just the wind through the canyon. But whenever that sound carried, the town's veterans would pause their morning coffee, eyes distant, lips curving under graying mustaches. They knew what the scientists and suits never would. Some bonds outlast governments. Some loves outrun bullets. And no cage on earth could hold a love like that.
The official record still lists MWD Valor as KIA. Captain Shaw remains AWOL. But in veterans' hospitals across America, nurses report the same curious phenomenon. Old soldiers with PTSD often wake from nightmares to feel a warm weight against their legs, though no dog lies there. They describe the same phantom presence, large, warm, with one notched ear. The VA calls it comforting hallucinations. The vets know better, because sometimes, in their darkest hour, they'll catch a whiff of gunpowder and leather, and if they listen very closely, they might hear two faint words whispered on the edge of sleep. Good dog.
So here's the truth they'll never put in the history books. Shaw and Valor didn't disappear that day. They simply became what the desert needed them to be. A warning to those who'd break faith with their own. A promise that no soldier, two-legged or four, is ever truly left behind. Next time you're in Sable Ridge at twilight, walk out past the old bus bench. Sit quietly as the stars emerge, and if you're very still, very patient, you might just hear it. The distant jingle of tags on the wind, the scuff of boots and paws moving together through the sagebrush. Still watching, still waiting, still reminding us all what loyalty really means. Sheriff Mercer knelt in the parched earth, the brass glinting between his fingers. Not Valor's tag. This one bore the name Captain D. Shaw, USMC, and a date that matched the Kunar Province ambush. But that wasn't what made his blood run cold. The back was engraved with fresh scratches, as if chewed by determined teeth. A message in Morse code only a soldier would understand. Alive. Searching. The sheriff pocketed it quickly. Some secrets weren't meant for government ears. That night, he placed it in Finn's mailbox with a note, "For when you're older."
The VA nurse didn't think much of the elderly veteran at first, just another Vietnam-era patient with dementia, claims of seeing ghosts, until he grabbed her wrist with surprising strength and rasped, "They're all coming back now. Shaw and his dog just opened the damn gate." Down the hall, another patient's service Labrador suddenly sat at attention, whining at an empty corner. Later, reviewing security tapes, administrators would swear they saw shadows moving where no shadows should be, some canine, some human, all converging towards Sable Ridge like iron filings to a magnet. They deleted the footage before sunrise.
The vet's scalpel trembled as she extracted the second microchip buried deep in Valor's scar tissue. The alphanumeric code should have matched his military records. Instead, it pulled up a classified file labeled Project Phoenix with one chilling line. Subject VLR-29 exhibits unprecedented cellular regeneration. Recommend immediate transfer to Site 47. Below it, handwritten in grease pencil, "Like hell you will. Sergeant M. Ruiz." Shaw recognized the name instantly. Ruiz had been their medic, the one who stayed behind to search the rubble, the one officially listed as suicide, probable PTSD. The timeline clicked horribly into place.
Dr. Alvarez's hand shook as she projected the X-rays. "See these metallic fragments? Iraqi mortar signatures, not Taliban. And this healed fracture pattern?" She tapped a 2003 Baghdad newspaper photo of a Marine canine unit. There, in the background, a younger but unmistakable Valor. "This dog's at least 16 years old, Captain. He shouldn't be alive, let alone this strong." Shaw's coffee cup shattered on the floor, because the math was undeniable. Valor had served in 2 wars before finding him, which meant their bond wasn't coincidence. It was destiny. and someone had tried very hard to break it.
The encrypted files told a story science couldn't explain. How Valor had been the sole survivor of a 2004 IED blast that vaporized his entire unit. How he'd walked 37 miles through insurgent territory to deliver a wounded soldier to base. How Project Phoenix had been studying him ever since, until the night a certain Sergeant Ruiz smuggled him to Afghanistan in 2018. "They called you their Lazarus dog," Shaw whispered as Valor nuzzled his palm. The dates aligned too perfectly. Ruiz hadn't just saved Valor from the Kunar blast, he'd sent him to Shaw deliberately. One last act of defiance from beyond the grave.
The Black Hawk's engine screamed as it lifted off, Lieutenant Commander Cross shouting into his headset. Below, Valor hit the sand rolling and came up sprinting, not toward the retreating agents, but straight for the canyon where Shaw lay bleeding. The chopper's spotlight caught the exact moment he leapt a 15-foot ravine no ordinary dog could clear. Cross would later claim the glare distorted what he saw next, the way Shaw's wounds seemed to knit under Valor's frantic licking, how the captain stood minutes later with strength that defied blood loss. The radio chatter that night used one word repeatedly: impossible. The veterans listening knew better. They'd heard the legends.
Blood loss made the edges of Shaw's vision go dark, but he held Valor's face with desperate hands. "Listen to me, boy. They'll come for you. You have to run." The German shepherd whined, pressing his full weight against Shaw's chest like a living bandage. Somewhere beyond the pain, Shaw felt it, a warmth spreading from where Valor's paws touched his skin. The same unnatural heat he'd felt in Afghanistan right before the ambush. The same warmth Ruiz had whispered about in his final letter. Shaw's grip tightened as understanding dawned. "Oh, God! You've been doing this all along, haven't you?" His last conscious thought was to wrap his arms tight around the dog. No more separations. No more goodbyes.
Finn's shaky cell phone footage became legend. The last clear images of Shaw and Valor show them disappearing into a sandstorm, the dog's bark echoing weirdly as if coming from multiple directions at once. Then, static. Audio experts isolated 3 anomalous sounds in those final seconds: a second set of paws running to join them, the distinctive cocking of an M4 carbine, and what some swear is Ruiz's voice growling, "About damn time." The government confiscated the original files, of course, but copies still circulate on dark web forums where veterans trade stories no one else will believe.
Memorials sprouted nationwide. A bronze canine statue in Quantico with an empty leash coiled at its paws. Tattoo shops reported a 300% increase in requests for Valor's paw print. Even Congress passed Rex's law, banning military animal testing. But the truest tribute came from the shadows. Every Veterans Day at precisely 11:11 a.m., security cameras at war memorials across the country glitch simultaneously. The frozen frames always show the same thing: a tall man's shadow accompanied by a larger canine silhouette, pausing just long enough to leave 2 items, a fresh tennis ball and a single dog tag rubbed shiny by time.
So here's what they won't tell you in the history books. War creates more than widows and orphans. It makes ghosts of the living and saints of the damned. But sometimes, just sometimes, it forges something purer, something that outlasts governments and graves. Next time you're in Sable Ridge, sit on that rusted bench as the desert turns gold at dusk. Feel for the 2 names carved underneath, and if the wind suddenly brings the scent of gunpowder and wet dog, don't turn around. Just whisper, "Good soldiers," and know that somewhere in the gathering dark, 2 old warriors are still walking their post, still guarding the things worth saving, still proving that even death takes the day off when true loyalty comes calling.